When I was 15, I was thrown out into a storm because of a lie, and she had no clue that those two words, "get out," would set off a chain of events she couldn't control. Right now, I'm standing by my apartment window, watching the rain trace familiar paths down the glass. It's funny how a simple sound can pull you straight back into the past, whether you're ready or not. There's a plain envelope on my table with handwriting I haven't seen in years, and I know exactly who it's from. Opening it means reopening a chapter one thought I'd closed for good. People like to think time heals everything, but some wounds just lie in wait. That night, when I heard "get out," I stood there believing it was all a misunderstanding that would fix itself in minutes. But 3 hours later, a phone call came that turned everything upside down. That's the moment I realized lies only have power until the truth finds its way out. In this story, that phone call was just the beginning of a reckoning she never saw coming. When I was 15, I was thrown out into a storm because of a lie, and she had no idea that saying "get out" would start something she could never take back. I am standing by my apartment window now, watching rain slide down the glass like it has somewhere else to be. Funny how a sound like that can hit you out of nowhere and drag you straight into a memory you thought you buried. On my table sits a plain envelope, cheap paper, familiar handwriting. I do not need to open it to know who sent it. I already know what it wants from me. People love saying that time fixes everything. That is easy to believe when you were not the one standing outside with nowhere to go. Some wounds do not heal. They wait. Quietly. Patiently. That night, when I heard those words, I honestly thought it was a mistake. A bad moment. Something that would cool off in 5 minutes. I stayed still, convinced the door would open again. It did not. 3 hours later, a phone rang, and that single call flipped the balance of power in a way none of us expected. The lie that pushed me into the storm did not disappear. It left a trail. That was the moment I learned something that changed my life. Lies only win when everyone stays comfortable. And what came next made sure no one stayed comfortable for long. That house looked normal from the outside. Neat lawn. Clean windows. A place that blended in quietly with every other home on the street. From the curb, nothing about it hinted at what waited inside. People passed by every day with no idea how heavy the air felt once the door closed behind you. Inside, everything ran on routines that were never written down but always enforced. Voices stayed calm on the surface. Smiles appeared when guests were around. Problems were handled behind closed doors, usually through silence rather than conversation. That silence carried more weight than shouting ever could. I learned early how to move carefully through rooms, how to read moods by footsteps alone, how to tell whether it was a good night or a bad one just by the way the front door opened. Some days felt manageable. Others felt tense for no clear reason, like waiting for a storm that no one wanted to name. She had a way of controlling the room without raising her voice. Decisions happened around her, not with her. If something went wrong, the explanation always arrived polished and convincing. She was good at sounding concerned, good at playing the role everyone expected her to play. Too good. I was the quiet one, the easy target, the person who did not cause scenes and did not fight back loudly enough to make things uncomfortable. That label stuck fast. Once people decide who you are, everything you do gets filtered through that idea. Looking back, the warning signs were there. Small things at first. Objects moved and no one remembered touching them. Conversations that happened without me but somehow ended with my name attached. Questions asked in a tone that already assumed the answer. I noticed it, but I did not understand it yet. Trust worked differently in that house. It was uneven. Some voices carried authority no matter what they said. Others had to prove themselves constantly. I learned which opinions mattered and which ones were politely ignored. When tension showed up, it always landed in the same direction. There were moments I tried to explain myself. Not argue. Just explain. Those moments never lasted long. The air would shift, faces would close off, and the subject would change. That was usually followed by a long stretch of quiet, the kind that made you question whether speaking up had been a mistake. Dinner conversations stayed surface level. School. Weather. Schedules. Anything deeper felt off-limits. Emotions were treated like inconveniences. If something felt wrong, the expectation was to deal with it privately and keep things looking fine. I remember thinking that if I stayed calm enough, careful enough, nothing truly bad could happen. That belief kept me quiet when I should have been louder. It made me doubt my own instincts. It convinced me that discomfort was normal. She thrived in that environment. Silence worked in her favor. It gave her space to shape narratives without interruption. By the time questions surfaced, answers were already prepared. The balance of trust leaned so far in one direction that no one noticed it tipping. From the outside, the house felt stable. From the inside, it felt like standing on something that looked solid but shifted under your weight. Not enough to panic, just enough to keep you off balance. I did not realize then that environments like that do not explode without warning. They collapse quietly, one assumption at a time. And by the time the truth starts knocking, the damage has already been done. That night did not come out of nowhere. It was built piece by piece inside those walls. The lie did not arrive loudly. It slipped in quietly, dressed as concern, wrapped in a tone that sounded reasonable enough to stop anyone from questioning it too closely. It started with looks instead of words. A pause when I walked into a room. Conversations that ended the second I showed up. I could feel something shifting even if I could not name it yet. The air felt tighter, like everyone was waiting for me to say something wrong. She played her role perfectly. Calm, caring, almost worried. The kind of person people trust instinctively, because she never seemed emotional or dramatic. When she spoke, it was never with accusation. It was always framed as fear. Fear for me. Fear about me. That is how the story was planted. I remember the first time I heard my name spoken in that tone. Soft, lowered, careful. As if whatever was being discussed needed to stay private, for my own good. I was not in the room when it happened, but I felt the effect immediately. The shift was impossible to miss. Questions started coming my way, disguised as concern. Where had I been earlier? Why was I so quiet lately? Did everything feel okay at school? None of it sounded hostile. That was the trick. Each question carried an answer already attached to it. I tried to respond normally. Honestly, I had nothing to hide. That only seemed to make things worse. The more calm I stayed, the more suspicious it appeared to make me. Silence was interpreted as guilt. Explaining myself sounded defensive. There was no winning position left. The lie grew in pieces. Never delivered all at once. Did not need to be. It was fed slowly, like something that needed time to settle in. Each detail sounded believable on its own. Together, they formed a picture I did not recognize. She never confronted me directly. That would have given me a chance to push back. Instead, she worked around me. She spoke to the people whose opinions carried weight. She framed everything as worry, never blame. It was careful, calculated, clean. By the time I noticed how far it had spread, the story had already solidified. I could see it in the way eyes lingered on me a second too long. In the way questions stopped being curious and started feeling final. Decisions were being made without me present. I remember standing in the hallway one afternoon, listening to voices from the next room. My name floated through the air, followed by a sigh. Then a sentence I could not fully hear, only the tone. Disappointed. Resigned. Certain. That was the moment I realized the lie was no longer just an idea. It had become truth to them. I wanted to scream. To demand proof. To ask why no one had come to me first. Instead, I froze. Shock has a way of stealing your voice before you realize it is gone. I stood there holding my breath, listening to my life being rewritten without my input. She had positioned herself as the reasonable one, the responsible one, the person who noticed problems early and tried to help. I had been cast as the issue before I even knew there was a problem. Every reaction I had only fed the narrative. Confusion looked like avoidance. Fear looked like guilt. Silence looked like confirmation. I did not understand how quickly things could turn when the wrong person controlled the story. The worst part was how calm everything seemed on the surface. No yelling. No scenes. Just a quiet agreement forming behind closed doors. The kind that does not feel dangerous until it is too late. I kept waiting for someone to stop and ask a simple question. No one did. By the time the lie reached its final form, it no longer sounded like a rumor. Sounded like a conclusion. A decision that had already been made and only needed the right moment to be acted on. That moment was closer than I realized. And when it arrived, it did not come with warnings or second chances. It came with 2 words and a door that was about to close. That morning started off pretending to be ordinary. The sky was gray but calm, the kind that makes you think rain might pass you by. I noticed it anyway. I always notice small changes in the air. Something about that quiet felt heavier than usual. Inside the house, conversations sounded polite but strained. Words landed carefully, like no one wanted to knock something over by accident. I moved through rooms slowly, aware of how every step echoed more than it should have. Even silence felt crowded. No one looked directly at me for long. Glances came and went, quick and assessing, then disappeared. It was the kind of attention that makes your shoulders tense without knowing why. Nothing had happened yet, but everything felt like it was leaning toward something. I tried to keep busy. Simple tasks. Normal behavior. Anything to prove, even to myself, that the day was still under control. The harder I tried to act relaxed, the more artificial it felt. Calm does not work when it is forced. Outside, the wind picked up. Tree branches scraped lightly against the windows, soft but persistent. The sky darkened in layers, not all at once. It felt deliberate, like the weather was building toward a point it had already chosen. I caught her watching me from across the room. Not openly. Just long enough to register, then gone. Her expression stayed neutral, almost thoughtful. That unsettled me more than anger ever could have. Anger gives you something to push against. Neutrality leaves you guessing. Questions came again, dressed as concern. Where was I planning to be later? Had I finished everything I needed to do? The tone stayed even, but the timing felt off. Each question landed heavier than the one before it, like they were being stacked for later use. My chest felt tight for no clear reason. I remember thinking I should say something, anything, to break the tension. Words lined up in my head, then scattered before I could choose one. The air felt too thick for honest conversation. Thunder rolled in the distance, low and drawn out. Not close yet, but close enough to promise more. The house seemed to react to it. Doors closed more firmly. Footsteps slowed. Everyone moved like they were bracing for impact. I stood near the window and watched the first drops hit the pavement. Slow. Spaced out. Each one darkening the concrete in small circles that quickly connected. The storm was committing now. No hesitation left. That was when I understood something was about to happen, even if I did not know what it was yet. The day had been narrowing toward a single moment, quietly stripping away every possible exit. By the time the rain truly started falling, the decision had already been made. I just had not been told yet. The words landed without warning. They were not shouted. They were not dramatic. They were delivered flat, final and absolute, as if the decision had already been rehearsed and I was only there to hear it out loud. Get out. For a second I did not move. My body stayed still while my mind tried to catch up. I remember blinking, convinced I had misheard something that serious. People do not just say things like that. Not without explanation. Not without questions. No one explained. No one asked anything. The room felt suddenly smaller, like the walls had stepped closer while I was not looking. I searched faces for hesitation, for doubt, for some sign that this was about to turn around. I did not find it. What I found was certainty, calm, resolve. That was when fear finally showed up. I opened my mouth to speak, but nothing useful came out. My thoughts were tangled, crashing into each other too fast to form sentences. I wanted to ask why. I wanted to defend myself. I wanted someone to slow this down. Instead, my backpack was pushed toward me. It hit my chest harder than expected, knocking the breath out of me for a moment. The weight of it felt wrong, like it contained more than books and loose papers, like it was carrying everything I was about to lose. The front door was already open. Cold air rushed in immediately, sharp and unforgiving. Rain poured down in thick sheets, loud enough to drown out whatever words might have followed. The storm did not hesitate. It did not wait for permission. I stepped onto the porch because there was nowhere else to go. The door closed behind me with a solid sound that echoed in my chest. Then came the lock. One click. Clear. Final. The kind of sound you do not forget. I stood there, soaked within seconds, staring at the door like it might change its mind if I waited long enough. My shoes filled with water. My hair clung to my face. The cold cut through me fast, but shock moved faster. This could not be real. That thought looped again and again. This was a mistake. Someone would open the door. Someone would realize how far this had gone. No one did. Cars passed on the street, headlights slicing through the rain. Each one felt like a reminder that the world was still moving even though mine had just stopped. I checked my pockets out of habit, then remembered. No phone. No money. No coat. Nothing except what I was already carrying. 15 years old. Standing outside in a storm. Homeless even if no one had used the word yet. The strangest part was how quiet it felt inside my head once the door stayed shut. Panic did not scream. It settled. Heavy. Cold. Practical. It asked one question and refused to leave. What now? I stepped off the porch and onto the sidewalk, rain blurring everything ahead of me. Each step felt unreal, like I was watching someone else move. My hands shook, not from weakness, but from the sudden understanding that no one was coming to fix this. The house disappeared behind me as I walked, its lights glowing warm through the rain. From the outside it looked peaceful, safe, like nothing bad had happened there at all. That image stayed with me, because in that moment I realized something that would take years to fully understand. I had not just been told to leave, I had been erased. And I did not know yet that the storm I was walking into was only the first part of what this night was about to take from all of us. The rain swallowed me the moment I stepped away from the house. It did not fall gently. It came down hard, fast, and relentless, like it had been waiting for permission. Within minutes, my clothes clung to my skin, heavy and useless, and the cold began working its way in. I did not have a plan. I had movement. My feet carried me forward on instinct alone, splashing through puddles that reflected streetlights in broken pieces. Each step felt uncertain, like the ground could disappear if I stopped paying attention. The storm blurred everything beyond a few feet ahead, turning the familiar street into something unrecognizable. Fear settled in slowly. Not panic. Panic comes loud and fast. This was quieter, sharper, calculated instead of screaming. It reminded me how exposed I was, how small I suddenly felt. Cars passed by without slowing down. Tires hissed against wet pavement. Headlights cut through the rain, briefly lighting me up before vanishing again. I wondered if anyone noticed a soaked teenager walking alone at night, or if I looked like part of the weather itself. My hands shook as I shoved them into my sleeves, trying to trap whatever warmth I had left. My teeth chattered and I hated that sound. It made everything feel more real, more urgent. I checked my pockets again even though I already knew the answer. Still nothing. No phone. No money. No backup plan hiding somewhere I forgot to look. Just a backpack growing heavier by the minute and thoughts racing faster than my feet could keep up with. The storm turned aggressive as I moved farther from the house. Wind shoved against my shoulders, forcing me to lean forward just to stay upright. Rain stung my face, sharp and cold, each drop landing like a reminder that I was completely unprotected. That was when doubt crept in. Maybe I should turn back. Maybe this had gone far enough to make someone reconsider. Maybe standing in the rain would prove something. The idea lasted seconds. I pictured the door, the lock, the certainty in their faces. Going back would not fix anything. It would only confirm the lie in a different way. So I kept walking. My muscles burned as the cold tightened around them. Every block felt longer than the last. I focused on small goals. Reach the next light. Pass the next corner. Keep moving. Thinking too far ahead felt dangerous. At some point the fear shifted. It did not disappear, but it changed shape. It stopped asking why this was happening and started asking how I was going to survive it. That question felt different. Heavier. Stronger. I realized I did not want to disappear quietly. I did not want this night to be the end of my story, even if it felt like it was trying to be. Something stubborn woke up inside me. Something that refused to let the lie have the final word. I picked a direction and committed to it. Not because it was safe, because standing still was worse. My legs ached. My fingers felt numb. The rain showed no mercy. Still, I moved forward, counting breaths, counting steps, refusing to let exhaustion decide for me. There were moments when the street felt endless, when the dark pressed in from all sides, when sitting down for just a minute sounded tempting. I knew enough to recognize that thought for what it was. Stopping meant giving in. So I did not. I talked to myself under my breath, words lost to the wind, reminders that I was still here, that I mattered even if no one else was saying it right now, that this storm did not get to decide how my life ended. Somewhere along that road, survival stopped feeling accidental. It became a choice. I did not know then how close I was to the edge or how little time I had left before my body gave up. I only knew that whatever happened next would not be quiet or invisible. The storm was not finished with me yet. And neither was the night. I do not remember the exact moment my body gave out. What I remember is the cold changing shape. It stopped biting and started pulling me under, like sleep I could not afford to take. The streetlights blurred into long streaks, and the rain softened into a distant sound, as if it was happening somewhere else. When I opened my eyes again, everything was too bright. White lights hovered overhead, sharp and unforgiving. The smell hit next. Clean. Chemical. Nothing like rain or wet pavement. A thin blanket rested over me, light but warm, and that alone felt unfamiliar. My hands trembled as I tried to move them, muscles stiff and slow to respond. Voices floated nearby. Calm. Professional. Focused. I caught words in pieces. Temperature. Minor. Exposure. Someone asked my name. Someone else asked how old I was. When I answered, the room shifted in a way I could not see but could feel. 15. That number mattered. A uniformed officer stood near the foot of the bed, not aggressive, not distant, just observant. He asked simple questions. Where had I come from? Why was I outside alone? Did anyone know where I was? Each question landed heavier than the last, not because they were difficult to answer, but because of what they implied. Another person entered the room with a clipboard and a softer voice. She introduced herself carefully, explaining her role without rushing. Child Protective Services. She said it like it was routine, but her eyes stayed on my face, watching for reactions. That was when it hit me. This was bigger than a bad night. The hospital staff moved efficiently, checking vitals, adjusting blankets, documenting everything. What had happened to me was no longer just a family issue. It was becoming a record, a report, something that would not disappear just because someone wanted it to. Later, I learned that calls were made while I lay there staring at the ceiling. The police contacted the house I had been pushed out of. The school was notified because a minor had been found alone in dangerous conditions. Questions were asked that could not be brushed aside. When the officer returned, his tone had changed slightly. Still calm but firmer. He explained that someone would need to account for why a 15-year-old ended up in a storm with no protection and no way to call for help. He said it plainly without accusation, which somehow made it worse. The CPS worker pulled a chair closer to my bed. She asked if I felt safe going back. The question surprised me. No one had asked me that before. I did not answer right away. I stared at the blanket, at my hands, at the steady rise and fall of my chest. For the first time that night, the lie did not feel all-powerful. It felt fragile. I said no. That single word changed the direction of everything. Because once authorities step in, stories stop being controlled by the loudest voice in the room. They start following evidence, timelines, responsibility. As the room filled with quiet paperwork and measured conversation, I realized something I could not have known earlier. The storm had pushed me into the open. And now, people who did not care about keeping things comfortable were paying attention. What came next would force the truth into places it had never been allowed to go before. The truth did not reveal itself all at once. It surfaced slowly in fragments, as people started asking the kinds of questions that had been avoided for years. When you remove comfort from a situation, motives stop hiding so easily. Looking back, the pattern feels obvious. At the time, it felt invisible. She had always needed control. Not in loud ways. Not through rules or arguments. Her control showed up in influence. In shaping how people saw situations before anyone else had the chance to question them. She understood something early on that I did not. Perception matters more than facts when no one is checking. I was younger. Quieter. Less demanding. That made me convenient. Jealousy did not show itself as anger. It showed up as comparison. Praise that landed unevenly. Achievements treated like inconveniences. The more I stayed out of the way, the easier it became to position me as a problem without resistance. Money played its role too, even if it was never discussed openly. Stress does strange things to households. When pressure builds, people start looking for explanations that feel simple. I became an explanation. A distraction from deeper issues no one wanted to address. Control thrives in silence, and that house had plenty of it. She learned how to guide conversations without leading them. A suggestion here. Concern there. Never a direct accusation. She framed everything as worry, which made questioning her feel cruel. Anyone who challenged her risked looking heartless or careless. I did not understand then how effective that strategy was. I trusted that truth would matter on its own. I believed honesty was enough. That belief made me predictable. It made me easy to work around. When suspicion started growing, she did not rush it. She let it settle. Let people connect dots that were never actually there. By the time the lie reached full shape, it felt organic. Earned. Logical. Control is rarely about one moment. It is about preparation. Every decision she made was designed to leave me isolated. Not physically at first, but socially. Emotionally. When people stop checking in with you, it becomes easier to speak for you. When they stop listening, it becomes easier to replace your voice. I remember moments that felt small at the time. Advice given about me instead of to me. Assumptions made without confirmation. Sympathy directed toward others while I was expected to adjust quietly. Those moments were not random. They were groundwork. Jealousy alone does not destroy someone. Money alone does not either. Control combined with opportunity and silence does. She believed she knew how this would end. She believed she understood the system well enough to bend it in her favor. Adults would believe her. Authority would not dig too deep. I would not push back hard enough to disrupt anything. In her mind, the outcome was already decided. What she did not count on was what happens when control overreaches. When a lie grows larger than the space designed to hold it. When people outside the environment start asking questions without emotional investment. She assumed I would disappear quietly. That assumption was her biggest mistake. Because control only works when everyone involved agrees to play their part. And the moment authorities stepped in, the rules changed. Evidence started to matter more than confidence. Timelines mattered more than tone. I did not know any of this while I was walking through the storm. I did not understand that years of quiet manipulation were about to collide with scrutiny she had never faced before. What I did know lying in that hospital bed was that something had cracked. The lie had worked inside the house. It would not survive outside of it. And once the truth started moving, it was not going to stop where she wanted it to. That was when the balance finally began to shift. Paperwork changes everything. Once my situation stopped being a private issue and started becoming a documented one, the tone shifted. Calm voices replaced assumptions. Clipboards replaced opinions. The story that had sounded so convincing inside that house began to weaken the moment it had to survive outside of it. The first cracks appeared in the timeline. A police officer asked when the accusations had supposedly started. Another asked when certain items were discovered. Dates were written down. Times were confirmed. No one rushed. That alone felt strange. For the first time, no one was trying to reach a conclusion quickly. Hospitals log everything. Arrival times. Body temperature. Condition on intake. Notes stacked on notes, each one neutral and precise. Those details mattered more than anyone realized yet. They anchored the night in facts that could not be adjusted later. Then school records entered the picture. Attendance is not emotional. It does not take sides. It shows where you were and when. Teachers confirmed my presence in class earlier that day. Assignments turned in. Questions asked. A normal school day that did not line up with parts of the story being told about me. That mattered. Someone requested phone records next. Not messages. Not opinions. Just data. Times. Locations. Activity. Silence filled the room while that information was reviewed. Silence feels different when it is not being used to control someone. Receipts followed. Transactions leave trails even when people assume they do not. Bank withdrawals have times attached to them. Stores have cameras. Systems remember things people forget. Each piece on its own looks small. Together they form something solid. What struck me most was how little emotion anyone involved in the investigation showed. No judgment. No sympathy-driven decisions. Just process. It was unsettling and comforting at the same time. The CPS worker explained things clearly without drama. She talked about consistency, about patterns, about how stories tend to fall apart when they are forced to explain themselves in detail. That was exactly what was happening. Statements were compared. Details did not match up the way they should have. One explanation required too many assumptions. Another relied heavily on trust rather than verification. The more questions were asked, the more carefully answers had to be shaped. Control started slipping. Someone pointed out a gap in the timeline that no one inside the house had questioned before. Another noticed how quickly conclusions had been reached without any attempt to verify them. The room grew quieter as each observation stacked on top of the last. Logic does not raise its voice. Does not need to. The investigation moved forward steadily, not dramatically. That pace made it impossible to interrupt or redirect. Every answer created another question. Every claim invited proof. I watched from the side, wrapped in a blanket, listening to adults speak about me as if I were not there. This time it did not feel like erasure. It felt like distance, the kind that allows clarity. For the first time, I was not being asked to defend myself emotionally. I was being protected by facts. One detail stood out more than the rest. A moment where someone realized that believing the lie had required ignoring several basic steps. No verification. No conversation. No pause. That realization landed hard. Negligence is not loud. It reveals itself quietly, when people start asking what should have been done instead. As the investigation continued, the story that had once sounded airtight began to sag under its own weight. Confidence could not replace evidence anymore. Tone could not override timelines. I saw it in the way professionals exchanged glances, in the way questions became more specific, in the way explanations grew shorter. Truth does not rush. It waits for the moment it has enough room to stand. By the end of that process, no one needed a confession. The pieces spoke for themselves. The lie had been built for a closed environment. It was never designed to survive scrutiny. That realization did not feel like victory. It felt like relief. Because justice does not always arrive with dramatic confrontations. Sometimes it arrives with forms, records, and quiet acknowledgement that something went very wrong. As the final notes were taken and next steps discussed, I understood something that would stay with me long after that night. The lie had depended on comfort. The truth depended on proof. And proof had finally entered the room. What followed would change everything permanently, in ways none of us were fully prepared for yet. The shift did not happen in a single dramatic moment. It unfolded steadily, like weight moving from one side of a scale to the other, slow enough to feel unreal until balance finally settled. Meetings replaced arguments. Neutral rooms replaced familiar spaces. Conversations stopped circling around feelings and started narrowing in on responsibility. The people asking questions were not interested in keeping anyone comfortable. They were interested in answers. That difference mattered. I was not present for every discussion, but I felt the change through tone alone. Voices that once sounded confident grew careful. Explanations that had once flowed easily began to pause and reset. When people are no longer in control of the story, they start choosing words with caution. A CPS supervisor spoke plainly about procedures that should have been followed and were not. The phrase failure to verify came up more than once. So did duty of care. Those words landed harder than any accusation because they were not emotional. They were factual. The house that once felt sealed off from outside judgment was no longer insulated. School administrators were looped in. Reports were shared. Decisions were documented. Each step removed another layer of protection that silence had provided. I remember sitting quietly while adults discussed where I would stay and what would happen next. No one spoke over me. No one dismissed my presence. That alone felt unfamiliar. When I was asked what I wanted, the question was sincere, not performative. Power had shifted because attention had shifted. The confrontation, when it came, was not loud. Did not need to be. The facts were already on the table. Timelines had been mapped. Records had been reviewed. There was nothing left to reinterpret. I watched expressions change as reality settled in. Not shock. Recognition. The understanding that the version of events they had relied on no longer held up. That realization created distance where closeness once existed. Consequences followed naturally from that distance. Temporary arrangements became formal ones. Contact rules were clarified. Expectations were set in writing, not assumed. Accountability replaced authority. For the first time, control had limits. Social consequences followed the legal ones. Conversations shifted in the wider circle. Questions began to circulate. The confidence that once carried the lie did not travel well once facts were involved. People who had stayed neutral grew cautious. Those who had believed unquestioningly grew quiet. I did not feel satisfaction watching it happen. I felt something closer to gravity. The environment corrected itself the way systems sometimes do when pressure is finally applied in the right place. Not perfectly, not gently, but decisively. I realized then how fragile power can be when it relies on perception alone. How quickly it weakens when it has to answer to anyone outside the room where it was built. No one apologized in a way that mattered. No speeches were given. That was not the point. The point was that the narrative no longer belonged to one person. It belonged to the record. As plans were finalized and timelines extended beyond that night, I understood that what had happened could not be undone. But it could be acknowledged. An acknowledgement changes things. I walked out of that process with clear next steps, structured support, and something I had not felt in a long time. Stability. What I did not know yet was how far those changes would reach, or how permanent the consequences would become for everyone involved. Because when power shifts for real, it does not stop at the first boundary it crosses. Keeps moving. Starting over did not feel empowering at first. It felt unfamiliar and unsteady, like learning how to walk on ground that moved when you trusted it. Every routine had to be rebuilt. Every assumption had to be checked. Safety was no longer something I expected. It was something I had to create. The days settled into a quiet rhythm. School became a place again instead of an escape. Homework turned into something predictable, almost comforting. Meals happened on time. Doors stayed unlocked for the right reasons. None of it felt dramatic, but all of it mattered. Healing did not arrive as a single moment. It showed up in small ways. Sleeping through the night without waking up tense. Answering questions without bracing for disbelief. Realizing that silence could exist without meaning danger. Those shifts added up, even when I did not notice them right away. Independence grew out of necessity, not confidence. I learned how to speak clearly without apologizing. How to trust my instincts again. How to recognize when something felt off and take that feeling seriously. Those skills were not taught. They were earned. I stopped waiting for permission to exist comfortably. That was a big change. I chose my routines. I chose my goals. I chose the people I kept close. For the first time, my life felt like it belonged to me instead of being managed around someone else's expectations. There were setbacks. Days when memories showed up uninvited. Moments when a raised voice or a slammed door sent my body into defense mode before my mind caught up. That part took time. Healing rarely moves in straight lines. Growth looked quieter than I expected. No dramatic reinventions. No overnight transformations. Just consistency. Effort. Small wins stacked on top of each other. That kind of progress does not grab attention, but it lasts. I started imagining a future without editing it around other people's comfort. College plans felt possible. Work goals felt real. Independence stopped being a reaction and started becoming a direction. The best part surprised me. Peace felt ordinary. Not exciting. Not intense. Just steady. I learned to appreciate that steadiness more than anything loud or impressive. Stability became the goal, not an accident. I did not rebuild my life to prove anything. I rebuilt it because I needed it to function. Confidence came later, after consistency had time to do its work. Strength followed naturally once fear stopped running the schedule. Looking back, I can see how much of my identity had been shaped by opposition. Removing that pressure gave me space to figure out who I was without it. That process took patience. It also took honesty. I did not realize then how much distance I would eventually put between myself and that past. Or how far I would go once I stopped carrying weight that was never mine to begin with. What I was building felt quiet and personal at the time. I did not know yet how visible it would become to the people who never expected me to get this far. Time did what distance could not. It put enough space between then and now for the past to stop shouting and start speaking quietly instead. Years passed without contact. Seasons changed. Addresses changed. My life moved forward in ways I once could not imagine. The letter arrived on an ordinary afternoon. It was forwarded through someone else, Not sent directly. Plain envelope. Light paper. The handwriting looked older than I remembered. Uneven in places, careful in others. I recognized it immediately. Recognition did not come with emotion. Came with awareness. I read it once. Then again. The apology was structured. Polite. Carefully worded. It acknowledged mistakes without naming them too clearly. Regret sat between the lines, mixed with explanations that arrived a little too late to matter. There was a request to talk. A suggestion of closure. An appeal to history. I folded the letter and set it down. For a long time I thought closure meant hearing the right words. I thought it meant a conversation that would finally balance everything that never made sense. Standing there with that letter in my hands, I realized something different. Closure does not require participation. I did not respond immediately. I did not feel angry. I did not feel relieved either. I felt steady. That steadiness told me more than any apology could have. Days passed. I carried on with work, with plans, with routines built on choice rather than reaction. The letter stayed where I left it. Its presence stopped feeling urgent. Eventually I replied. Brief. Clear. Honest. I acknowledged receipt. I accepted the apology for what it was. I set boundaries without explaining them. No meeting. No reopening. No debate. That was enough. I did not need to revisit the past to confirm what I already knew. My life had grown around the absence. It did not need the missing pieces filled in to remain solid. Letting go did not feel dramatic. It felt final. The past lost its leverage in that moment, not because it was forgiven in some grand way, but because it no longer dictated my choices. I closed the chapter without rewriting it. As I sealed the envelope and set it aside, I understood something I had not before. Survival had given me distance. Time had given me clarity. And clarity had given me the freedom to move on without looking back. For a long time I thought the story ended the night I was pushed into the storm. I thought that moment defined everything that came after. Fear has a way of convincing you that the worst thing to happen to you is also the most important thing about you. It is not. What followed mattered more. The choices I made when no one was watching. The boundaries I held when it would have been easier to explain myself. The life I built without needing permission from the people who once controlled the narrative. Justice did not arrive as revenge. It arrived as balance. Systems corrected themselves. Truth surfaced without theatrics. Consequences followed quietly, permanently, without needing my involvement. That kind of justice lasts longer than any confrontation ever could. Peace came later, once I stopped measuring my progress against the past. I learned that healing is not about erasing what happened. It is about refusing to let it keep deciding who you are allowed to be. I stopped asking why it happened to me. That question never had a satisfying answer. I started asking what I wanted to carry forward instead. The answer to that one changed everything. The moral is simple but not easy. Silence protects the wrong people when it goes unchallenged. Comfort delays truth, but it does not prevent it. Lies collapse under their own weight when they are forced into the light. And survival is not just about making it through the storm. It is about what you do after the sky clears. I did not come out of this stronger because of what happened. I became stronger because I chose growth over bitterness, clarity over chaos, and distance over damage. If you are listening to this and it feels uncomfortably familiar, know this. Your story is not over because someone tried to end it early. Your worth is not defined by who failed you. And walking away is sometimes the most powerful decision you can make. Some storms do not break you. They show you exactly where you were never meant to stay. When I look back now, I do not see myself as the 15-year-old standing in the rain anymore. I see the person who kept going when it would have been easier to disappear. I see someone who learned that survival is not loud, dramatic, or heroic. Sometimes it is quiet. Sometimes it is just choosing not to give up. That night was supposed to erase me. It did not. It redirected me. Life did not reward me because I suffered. It changed because I refused to let that moment be the end of my story. Distance gave me clarity. Time gave me perspective. Walking away gave me peace. And that is something no apology, no explanation, and no second chance could ever replace. If you are still here listening to this, I want you to think about something for a moment. What would you have done if you were pushed out because of a lie? Would you have gone back when the door eventually opened again? Or would you have built a life so strong that you never needed to knock? Your answer matters more than you think. If this story connected with you, let me know in the comments where you are watching from and what part stayed with you the most. I read them all, and your experiences deserve to be heard too. If you want more real, gripping stories like this one, make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications so you do not miss the next chapter. Some stories end in storms. Others begin there. Thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next one.